Good evening, and thank you all for joining us as we welcome fellow MGS member Deborah Nevins tonight and this morning for some of you. Debbie founded the New York-based landscape design firm Deborah Nevins Associates over 30 years ago. Her work, her firm's work includes large-scale prestige landscaping projects in the US and extensive residential gardens and estates through the US, Caribbean, and Europe. Tonight, she's going to give an account of how her firm was involved in creating the 16-hectare Stavros Niarchos Foundation Cultural Park and Centre in Athens, which features Mediterranean plantings and one of Europe's largest green roofs. The project involved an 8-year collaboration with architects Renzo Piano and Athenian landscape architects H. Pangalou. Heli is also with us this evening. Debbie was a New York-based professional, California-based professional, but was specifically requested by Renzo Piano. I was lucky to visit the park last Sunday with about 10 other MGS members, and it is an incredibly impressive place. We loved all of the plantings. We found it to be keeping pretty well in shape. So often things, when maintenance crews come in, things change. And we were intrigued by the grasses on the green roof, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that from Debbie. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us, Debbie. I know that your time is a very scarce commodity, and we're very grateful for it today.
Thank you.
Would you like to share your screen now?
Well, and thank you for inviting me. I was just actually in California where I do a lot of work, and just to say that, well, let me just share the screen and then I'll tell you about, okay, let's see if this works. Now, we don't want that mode. This isn't the mode we want.
Don't worry, just take it easy. We'll get there.
Got it.
There you go. Fantastic.
And just let's hope that it moves correctly. Well, and anyway, Angela asked me how did I, get involved with Renzo Piano, and I had done a huge house in Aspen, Colorado with him. I had been working for the client previous to that for about 15 years. And then I had also done other work with Renzo, the museum, well, actually, that was after, the Art Institute of Chicago. There's a new wing that Renzo did, and I did the interior garden. So this is a view. I don't know how many of you, of course, have seen the park and the building, but it's a view from the air, obviously. Sort of not completely finished, but pretty much there. And just to give you a sense of the scope of things and orientation, the Bay of Phaleron is to the left here on the screen. This is one of the biggest solar roofs in in Europe, and it provides energy for most of the building except for performances. And there is there's a garage which trucks can enter through here. It's a service area, and then there's another garage for visitors, etc. But in addition to this 40-acre park and the canal and the redoing of the Esplanade, Ellie and I also first worked on, or in concert with the beginning, the municipal park, which I'm circling here. And as you can see from this slide or view, there's a spaghetti of highways that separates the building from the bay. And the area is called Calithea, which means beautiful view. And there was a joke in Renzo Piano's office that, there was no view at all. No one could see the sea if you lived, in a lower floor of these buildings. So that was one of his goals, to bring a real beautiful view to the people who were living nearby and let's see if how does this work now. Why is this not working? I want to be able to move. There we go. So this is a view of the building at night over the canal, and it'll help you understand various uses. On the far right is the building is the National Library of Greece, and on the left is the Theater and Opera House, and then you can see where the roof is above. And there are several levels to the roof. I'll explain that later. But one of the interesting things about what Renzo conceived of was that these two functions, library and opera house, don't need a lot of light. They need light, but not on all sides. So here I am standing at the site before when we just began to work, and there was nothing there, totally degraded. It was the original, one of the first, if not the first port of classical Athens. Then at some point, and there's archaeology which is related to this issue, building, and particularly the Esplanade, which I won't get into, but then it became at various points a munitions factory, a racetrack, and a bus depot. So it was completely degraded and flat. Here you see a drawing of it overlaid on the density of Calathea. And before Renzo got totally involved, there was a planning firm that suggested that the opera house and library be two separate buildings on the site with park between it. But at that point, and here you see in the very far distance, the roof, the solar roof and a crane. And I took this photo from the Hilton, which is in central Athens across from the American Embassy. But this also gives you the context of Athens. So these are Renzo's sketches. And you can see that so the canal is in the lower part of the drawing, right here. The original Esplanade, where I have an arrow, and then the building, and then you begin to see the levels here. This is the level which is lower than the green roof, which I'll talk about, and under it is the garage. And you see that you have to proceed up 30 meters actually from the street that's on the far right up to the solar roof and the main roof, and a small conference center there too. Okay, let's get back. So I will erase this. When I first came to Athens, I really wanted to experience the landscape. And this is a hillside where euphorbia is just growing, naturally. And it was a sort of keystone to the thinking. And I always talk about the park should speak Greek. I mean, not only obviously the library speaks Greek, but in a conceptual way that it should feel like you are in Greece, and not be some other kind of intervention. And I remember well that one of the opening days, one of the board members was walking with me, and he said, "Oh, this smells just like my village." And there was lots of thyme and things like that, sage, and that was to me a great compliment. Now, let's see. And of course, I immediately went to the Acropolis. I'd been to Greece as a student, but many years before. And as you may or may not know, the base of the Acropolis, the landscaping there, was designed by a man named Pikiones, a great architect. He didn't do a lot of architectural work, but he spent probably a decade working on the landscape here, which is, and the paving, you'll see in a minute, but it's olives, cypress, oak, and really the palette that speaks Greek. And here's one of my photos of looking up at the Acropolis. The paving, much of it is from ancient sites which had been degraded and abandoned, and he laid every single stone. This is one of Renzo's favorite photos. We never did paving like this, really, but it shows his own poetic spirit in admiring such a thing. And I'll explain that a little bit about his mind as we go along. So one of the first things I did was I went to the Mediterranean Garden Society garden. And here you see Sally Resolou leaning over. She's no longer with us, but it's such a beautiful garden. And of course, it's filled with plants of the Frigana, I hope I pronounced that correctly, which is a sort of code word for the native landscape in Greece. And it, I think if I'm not incorrect, translating it as toast. You know, obviously very dry heat, which makes a kind of toasty landscape, but very beautiful. And you can see here, this is another shot from the Mediterranean Garden Society. Poppies were all in bloom with native quercus oak in the middle ground here. And it was, you know, obviously quite inspirational to me, as well as this, which is the garden of Olivier Philippi. And many of you know who he is. He's the great author and nurseryman near Montpellier and another place called Béziers. And he's written many books, which you probably know, but the dry, which I have right here, the dry gardening handbook was one of his first books. He also wrote one, which I don't think has been translated into English, called Alternatives au Gazon, which is just basically ground cover plants that you can walk on. So we were able to, many of the plants we wanted were not readily available in Greece. And so we bought mother plants from Philippi and propagated, which you'll see later, from them. But the visit there was really inspirational, both in terms of the design and what, you know, he was doing and is doing. This is, again, you could see the bay. He lives near a bay where they harvest oysters. Another view. And this is the shot, drone shot during construction, showing you where the site is in relationship to the bay. Another one, which is a little clearer, and during construction, you can see we're sorting out the pathways and planting zones. And on the left is the Esplanade, which goes over the highway, and you can walk through it to the sea. On the left, there's also sort of a round hippodrome site building, which was built for the Olympics, and is now, I guess, a conference center. And on the right was the municipal garden or park that we designed together. Okay. And another view of the Faleron Bay. And again, you'll see how degraded the site was. This is at the edge towards the city. These are eucalyptus trees, which I wanted to get rid of. And for obvious environmental reasons, and they're not, in quotes, Greek. So I said to Renzo, I'd like to take them down. And he said, why? I said, well, they're not Greek. And he said to me, you're a racist. Anyway, this is, again, just a shot. Here is, you can see from a nearby building, the Esplanade, which was built for the Olympics. And later on, we'll show you how we changed it. It wasn't a very nice geometry. This is showing you the entire layout of the site from an exhibition at the Royal Academy in London with a wooden model of the site. You can see the municipal garden or park to the right, and there's a running track here, a hippodrome sort of geometry of a running track. And then this is the layout of the space, which I'll help you with here. Okay, so this was the plan for the park and that we drew. And I'll show you different areas and then we'll get into it more intensely. But this is the green roof that was just mentioned, and it's over the library. And again, as I said, a library doesn't need that much light, especially one with archival material. And then you walk up here, you're in this roof, which is not, it's over the opera, so it's not, and it's not a green roof. So the green roof is only where it is green. And then this large solar panel, and then below it, here is in this windy kind of looking path. It's above the garage. Now, when I showed that geometry to Renzo, and it was defined or built or designed because the roof wasn't flat. The roof has various curves and grade changes, and everything in this garden or park has to be universally accessible. So we had to make these irregular patterns, serpentine patterns, such that the grade was less than 5% or less. There are other walks which are much steeper, but these diagonals that you see here, they all provide the ability for someone to walk at a grade less than at 5% or less. But if you walk straight up at some points, you'll see later, you're at 8%, which is, or even 12, which is, you know, quite steep. So there, here are the outline of the park, the north entry, what we call Western Walks, which also has a labyrinth, the lawn for playing, Mediterranean Garden, which was the area basically that was most horticulturally intense, you might say, and then the Esplanade. There was the idea of what of use and play and program, and that's kind of illustrated here. This gives you the statistics. We purchased 1,500 trees, propagated 320,000 shrubs. There were 164,000 grass plugs and 7,000 square meters of a green roof. This is obviously during construction, and what's interesting here that I'm going to talk about is the grade change that I've been mentioning before, and you can see that when you look at the wall to the mid of this slide. And this is a model we built showing you the relationship of the town or city to the far right to the conference center, and that's a grade change of 30 meters. Now, below, this is the Esplanade after it was reconceived, and you had to be able to go from the canal up to the level that crosses the highway, and there we designed these steps that become very few at one end, and then as you get to the top, many more to get up to the appropriate place. So this illustrates these different grade changes that I was mentioning. Almost zero is the chartreuse color, and the darkest green, 8 to 10, even 12%. So you could see how the garage roof with the serpentine pattern of paths that I mentioned is maybe 3-4%. And here you see a little more closely illustrated. And here you see now a drone shot of the Mediterranean Garden. And again, these straight up paths are you know, quite steep for someone who is challenged, and the diagonals much less steep. And in order to get to the top or the park from the Esplanade, there's a ramp, which you see here, which is accessible, but there's also on this side and the other side going up to a restaurant, a set of steps. Now, many of the design decisions are not just aesthetic, you'll see, but we wanted to capture, blue is indicating capture of water. So we wanted to capture the water from this now slope in heavy rains in a way that would not be so sort of obvious. And basically, the grade in the blue area is slightly lower than the street. So it's almost acting as not a pond at all, but a kind of holding point, you might say. This shows you many inlets that bring water into underground receptacles. But this is a kind of illustration a little more clearly to you, and you'll see this soon, that the paths are lined with these drain channels. And then at certain points, there's an actual drain that brings the water, you can see it here, to the holding points. So this is the Mediterranean garden, and you have salvias, euphorbias, olive trees, which line some of these walks, Italian cypress. Here's another, this is the Western Walk, again, quite horticulturally intense. Olive trees, carob trees. Here you see it again. And then at certain points, I designed these plateaus and also focal points along the lower paths, here illustrated by placing an olive tree there. You're getting up to the green roof at this point. Gora, thyme, dianthus, artemisias. And within these spaces, I would have a tree, like a carob, and have a little inlet, you might say, into the planting, such that you could get some shade as the trees mature. Lavenders. This is a plant I really like, it's fascinating, Sarcopterium. I think in Greek it's also maybe called Aphana, and it has this incredible connection to ecology. In the summer, it doesn't happen so much in the park because it's irrigated, and I'll get on to that in a minute, but it loses its leaves and it's just a bundle of thorns in the summer, self-protecting from the heat and dryness. Coronilia, Ebonis cretica, Phlomis, more lavender, olives, dianthus. Again, you can see the drip irrigation. So both at the lower part, and I will get into it in detail, and the lowest level of the park, we designed a kind of a labyrinth. And in the fountain at the lower part, it's just the design of that, but not an actual walking labyrinth, as this is. It's not a maze, it's a labyrinth. And you can see the garage roof from here as well, and also the different levels. So you have this level being the lowest, then you've got the garage level, which you see mid-slide, and then the green roof, which leads you up to the viewing area under the solar roof. We did a lot of mock-ups of many things, and this is an example of paving mock-up. This is the design. And now we come to the green roof. So there are, as I said, there are two really green roofs. One is over the garage, which has deeper soil, so we have trees on it and shrubs, whereas we only have about 5 inches, 4 to 5 inches of soil on the green roof over the library where those skylights are. This is looking down from the roof towards the green roof, and it has, quite a slope. And you're looking at up to what's underneath the solar panels here. We have no green roof under this, but there are sort of steps that people can sit on and view down to the park or out to the sea. And that little squirrely thing on the right is the actual energy line that brings energy from the roof to the buildings. And Renzo wanted to be very expressive of that, and so people would really understand what was happening here. Now, this is a photo of the Diomedes Botanical Garden in Athens. And at first we thought, oh, we'll plant the green roof with sedums, which is a normal thing to do. But to me, it didn't speak Greek. And so when we got here, I had this revelation, no, we should have grasses that are like the hills of Athens or Attica. And we combine that with, this is the wonderful shrub lentiscus, which is a native, obviously Greek shrub mixed here with some of the grasses. We also used phlomis, and what we tried to do is at the bottom, the top of the park, so to speak, and before you get to the green roof, we tried to integrate grasses with perennials and the lentiscus so that there was a kind of easy transition. You didn't go from Mediterranean garden with its highly, special planting to green roof, and it's kind of a transition between the two. So you see that here. And then at some points you have to prune the grasses. And I was trying to illustrate to the people working how to do it, not hedging them, but doing them sort of naturally so that when they were cut before the major cut once a year, it would look more natural. On the edges of the roof, we have to have guardrails, of course, but we also we designed with Renzo's office almost like troughs with planting, and here's prostrate rosemary so that even the edges of the building seem integrated, with the park. This is a drawing. So then the question was, how do you make, we had about 7 different grasses, and that's a funny story too, because, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but how do you make it seem natural? So this is the planting plan. Each of these, it's almost like a petty point, drawing that you use when you do a petty point pillow. But we wanted the beds to be almost like fingers integrating each other. And as I mentioned, there are 7 types of grasses, and they were, I'll get back to that in a minute, but here you're seeing making the green roof with the various, Zinco was the company that supplied the drainage mats and the drainage structures that are under this substrate of material in which the plants grow. And here you're seeing laying it in with the drip irrigation. They brought up plants, and this is more for the garage roof, and soil via cranes. This shows you a system called platypus. This is again for the garage roof, where there's straps and weights that instead of, that hold the tree down to the roof of the, in this case, the garage. This is showing you the whole planting substrate system with one of the things is called foam glass gravel, which is a buildup if you don't want to have so much soil and such. So you build up the volume with foam glass gravel. It hadn't been used that much in the United States, and it's environmentally much better than sometimes mostly in the States until a certain point, which I'll explain in a minute, big foam blocks, you might say. And the foam glass gravel is great also because it does provide a tiny bit of openings between these little bits of foam glass for moisture and, if any moisture gets in there, and even air. After this, I did a big project in Houston, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, where we had a green roof, and we had to do buildup. And they had never used foam glass gravel. So we were able to find one importer and manufacturer in the United States, and hopefully now a lot of people use it, but it's used throughout Europe. So here's another example of building that roof. So here we are. We hired the Diomedes Botanical Garden to go out and gather seeds of these 7 types of grasses from the hills of Attica. And one day the contractor came into the meeting room with a box, maybe the size. Ellie would know the size of the box. And he said, see this box? This box is worth 50,000 euros. And we had to then send these seeds to various nurseries throughout Greece, which is another interesting point I'll explain in a minute, to propagate these plugs. And one of the things we wanted to do was, we didn't have one nursery propagate all these plants, not only the grasses, but the shrubs and perennials, because we wanted, there were 2 or 3 reasons. One, we were afraid if there was disease in one greenhouse or propagation center, then the whole thing would be lost. So that was a kind of insurance policy. But also we wanted people to become more interested in growing these native Greek plants and grasses. So here you see the plugs being planted on the roof, and now it's, you know, quite pretty mature pretty easily. Here you could see how I designed it such that I mentioned before that there's an integration of the grasses with some of the lentiscus and phlomis that bring you down to the Mediterranean garden, so that there was a kind of melding together. Here's the propagation site, one of the nurseries. And here you see the other roof that I mentioned, the garage roof, which I won't talk that much about, but also you can see the perimeter with the guardrails and the troughs in which grow the prostrate rosemary. Now I'll talk to you about the Esplanade. So this is the before, and it was very steep and the geometry wasn't really great. And this shows you the relationship between now the park and the town on the right, the city on the right, with 30-meter ascent. And here you see it again being built. This is also indicative of a grade change. But this is important because now the blue is what was, and the red is what we changed and added, so that there was a, Renzo likes, when you hold 2 strings together, and naturally there's a curve, it's called a catenary. And he wanted this sort of to feel like a natural catenary curve. And as I mentioned, if you're at the canal, it's only a few steps at the city side to get up to the Esplanade. But as you ascend, and here that you see on the lower image, these blue lines and stripes are the steps that bring you up to the higher level of the Esplanade. So the steps kind of integrate, go from a few steps to many. And this is showing the sections where you are at the relationship to the park and the relationship to the Esplanade at different points. The top one being the highest point in the Esplanade and where the most steps are that I just tried to explain. This is a plan view. And then we planted the Esplanade again with pines. Now, I want to go back a minute. The canal is lower than the entrance to the building. And again, very specifically, because it's a holding point for water in big storms. So it becomes a huge drainage structure. Again, a lot of our thinking had twofold. It works in 2 ways. Here you see the steps going up towards the higher point. Plane trees were planted along the edge of the canal, and drought-tolerant shrubs below. So here you see the steps going from the canal level to the Esplanade. But if you can imagine, as you walk towards the bridge that goes over the highway, you have more and more steps. And then there were these opening points where people can sit. You can see that here, I think. And there's a cafe at the end. This shows you the interior of the canal. It's periodically cleaned. And then they have kids, you know, sailing on the canal itself. So this, getting back to this idea of the labyrinthine design, is in the lower part of the park. There's a small cafe, that square there. And as I mentioned, this area is lower than the street. This shows you this design, which you'll see in a minute, the real thing, of a splash fountain, again, giving more activity to the park. And here you see it installed, but it has another can have another function. You could have small concerts there and people can sit around the edges. Eventually, this pattern, the stone was covered over for various reasons with a mat. And this shows you the section where there are places to sit on the sides, and then the level of the fountain. And you can see how in a flood, a lot of water would be held here. So this is now a series showing you the propagation of the plants for the park. It took several years. You can dig and plant successfully very large olives. We didn't take this one. This was at a nursery owned by someone named Faustinus, but you could see the size of this box. So we had to figure out how to have the trees handy. I mean, it wasn't like you planted this thing in 2 months. It was planted over probably 2 years, but we had to gather the plants in a location outside of Athens, about 2 hours, so that when they were needed, they could be easily transferred to the park. These are the plane trees, and it's the Alexio nursery where we held them. Olive trees, and they are encased in what's called air pots, which are plastic, and they all have little holes in them. These are pines. I'll show you in a minute here, secured by these little green, slightly like a screw. But what it allows is air to come through, so that if you're holding a tree for a year, 2 years, 3, mainly 2 to 3 years, the roots don't encircle and they get cut by the oxygen, that the air that is coming through these ports. This is an example. We chose a lot of trees from that nursery. Here are some smaller ones, and then we also had a few bigger ones to choose from. There's Ellie on the far right, waving to you. In the United States, we have metal baskets, but in Greece, they use what's called sweet wire, so they don't have to worry about these heavier metal constricting roots, and it just disintegrates. This is one of the first olives that was brought to the site. This is from Philippi. I just wanted to show you a few more from his nursery, and it relates to his second book, the Alternatives to Grass, and this is called Frankenia. It's a wonderful place to visit. Here are some of his Santalinas, sages, his garden again. Here we're planting an olive tree, and we've had to build up the soil. The soil was a whole other issue, which I won't get into too much here, but you can imagine we had to import all the soil and make the soil. Here's Ellie in the middle with some of the team from the builders. Now, in addition, let me go back one, and I'll try to draw on that. We have a whole area of playgrounds, which is here, near that splash fountain, and next to the municipal park, where I'm putting a check. And then later, we're going to talk about the street here. So in this area, we designed playgrounds using equipment, wonderful equipment from Richter Spielgerät in Germany. And one of the great things about their product is that many of their, let me see what's happening here. Equipment is interactive, which you'll see in a minute. So what we also did is I designed areas for little ones, which is this circle to the left, and then other areas where bigger kids, you know, would have the could now what's happening could play. So the little ones, many of the things we chose are interactive. They play with another person. And here you can see there's these water fountains that they're made to push. Little animals that rock and they can sit on together here. These are all seesaws, little houses that they can play in. This is for the larger kids. It's like sort of like pickup sticks. So you need two people, obviously, to make this thing move. Now, this is a wonderful product that they make. And it's like a, what should I say, a cascade through, and at the bottom is sand where you can make mud pies. But the water is not motorized. They have to push it. So they have to learn about, you know, the mechanics of a pump, for example. But again, it's a kind of interactive situation, not just a static play. These are twirling devices. More seesaws, kids in the little playhouses, larger kids. These are wonderful in other parts of the park, not in the playground area. We added certain things from Richter. These metal, looks like grates, you jump on them and they make sounds, beautiful sounds. So again, it's interactive with the kids making this, you know, they get exercise and then they make a noise. Here, that's one of the architects, Vasily, who works for Renzo Piano, playing on one of these instruments. So this is the edge of the park that I mentioned. It's between the main park and the municipal park, and it became a kind of outdoor gym with a running track, outdoor gym equipment, sometimes used for festivals, and that's a whole other thing that we'll talk about in a second. You can see it's a running track with this mother holding a baby. Handicap races, kids, and then they have huge concerts in the summer, free to people, for Athenians, and this is an example of that. So that is my presentation. I'm very happy to have questions.
Thank you, Debbie. If you'd like to unshare, then we'll all
Sure,
go back
sure,
to
sure.
we'll all go back to gallery, and we can all see each other. I had a question that I wrote down. Oh, can I start? The plane trees, were they orientalis? We were having a
Yes,
debate.
yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Maggie, did you see my email? My little message. Susan Brooks was going to do
Yeah, I did. I'm here.
Oh,
At
well
the minute, hello. There's at the moment there aren't any questions on the chat, but I'm sitting here watching. Would you tell us more about the grasses that you choose from Michael Riggs?
Well, I can read their names off.
Yeah.
Brachypodium ramosum, Brachypodium retusum, Romus.
What should we do with this? Somebody can write them on the chat, maybe.
Well, I actually Ellie helped me this morning, and I have them in an email. Now, how do I think if I showed my screen again, if I was to do that, I could.
So just let's talk about the rationale of they were obviously things that you had seen in the surrounding hills.
Well, I had been to the Diomedes Botanical Garden, and they have a hill there with pine and just native grasses. I don't know that they even planted them. They were just, what was there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came up with this idea, and they were able to collect from the hills of Attica 7 types of grasses that are native. And
Kelly,
then
can you write it on the chat? Can you write those names?
I can bring it up if I can.
Debbie, don't worry, I will send them in the chat.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
people want to grab
Please.
them, then that's probably easiest.
Okay, so that's going to be the grasses. Here's a few more questions coming up now already. The trees along the walkways were columnar. Did you intentionally avoid trees with a broad canopy?
Do you mean along the canal? Because we have olives and carob trees, which have a kind of, as they grow, big canopy. And then there are pines. We didn't talk about the pines that surround that big lawn in order to give shade. So we were trying to actually have shade where we could.
Okay, thank you. People are interested.
I may just other comment. You do see the cypress, they provide no shade, but they were used as kind of sculptural elements and additions to feeling like you were in Greece.
Okay, great. There's some interest in the water system that you used, and did it result in a huge water bill to have all that irrigation?
Oh, we use water, we have a reverse osmosis situation, and because the aquifer actually, because it's so near the bay, was slightly saline. So and most of the plants, as they get established, don't need a lot of water except in very dry conditions. In the beginning, we needed a lot more water, as you would know, when you have to establish plants. But it's a drip system throughout. At one point, they tried to do, rain capture, but they decided that it wasn't actually economical, and that idea was abandoned. And we worked with Arup Engineering, which some of the people may have heard of. They did all the civil engineering, and they even did the lighting design and the acoustical work. And the engineers were Expedition Engineering in London. And one of the fascinating things is how the buildings are built to resist earthquakes. And I think they're on something like akin to ball bearings. And they, and the library and the opera house are separate, totally separate structures.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, there's another question just generally about maintenance. It's heartening for Angela to say that it all looked in good shape when you saw it last week. How have you managed the maintenance? Is that been an issue of getting people to do what needs doing?
Well, one of the things that they smartly did, the foundation, is to hire Ellie on a consulting basis, and to not do any, she's not a contractor or anything, but she works with the maintenance people to help them understand how to prune and make it look natural, the pruning, because a lot of for example, the lentiscus, it grew so well, it has to be pruned quite frequently. Same thing with all the trees, that to make it a natural pruning, not just making hedges shrubs look like hedges.
Yeah.
So Ellie is, I don't know how frequently she goes, but she's definitely employed by them to help keep the aesthetics as it should be.
Okay, that's really important, isn't it? There's a question about how the Athenians have reacted to this fantastic new park.
Oh, it's just
Has it been
much more people than they'd ever thought would come.
That's fantastic. Great.
If I may
there's-
add to that,
Yeah,
initially we were
please.
expecting, remember, Debbie, when we're doing with the Boston Consulting Group, we were expecting about from 500 to 700,000 visitors per year. And we end up with more than 4,500,000 per year. So this puts a lot of stress in the maintenance as well, but it was a very warm welcoming from all the Athenians.
Ellie,
Thank
do you
you.
want to talk anything more about the maintenance?
No, I think everybody knows how difficult it is. We are outsourcing and we're trying to make people understand that what irrigation, can actually have the adverse from what we want. So it's a matter of continuous education in relation to, drought tolerant plants, etc. And I think what is very interesting is the fact that it's a public space. So the maintenance is kept on a real pragmatic base in relation to the visiting hours and how people can actually work when the park is in use. So you will see that after, for example, clean Monday, the park is a mess and there is a good team on site with a park manager that actually, try to make it look good again. But I was very happy to hear Angela saying that they visit the park and she finds that it's still, in a good shape.
Okay, carrying on with the water theme, Nicholas Stadden has got a question about water. Did you want to ask that yourself, Nicholas?
Yeah, Maggie, thank you. So I think the question might have been answered that you're using reverse osmosis, which I can fully understand in the proximity of the garden to the salt water. So is there, how far does the salt water actually encroach inland? And is there any opportunity to use regular water? Because I'm sure reverse osmosis has got to be extremely expensive to run.
Ellie, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, actually, there are 4 boreholes in the park, and we're using also water from the boreholes. It is sort of not that saline as from the sea. The last 2 years, only 2 out of the 4 boreholes are working, but this year with the rain, they're going back to normal. So we're trying to use reverse osmosis as little as possible because you have a very good point. It is quite expensive to do this.
Okay, moving on to something a bit different. What's the material on the ground of the play area, please?
Well, it's a kind of gravel. People have moved away from the rubber, kind of in Europe anyway, surfaces, because things like shards of glass get stuck. It also gives you a little more drainage.
Okay, thank you. Was planting constrained by seasonal conditions, and what was the mortality rate of all those many plants that you grew on?
Well, I think there's very small mortality in the grasses and the shrubs, but some of the trees did die, and probably from overwatering, actually, and they had to be replaced.
Okay. Did you include any planting for bees, bee-friendly trees and plants and
There,
so on?
there's a whole section, which I didn't talk about, a small vegetable garden, just as a demonstration and educational place, and also some bee hives.
That's great. Several people are mentioning having visited the park, which is wonderful. Somebody notices that many of the plants and grasses are growing also in the south of Italy. And There's a question here about, is anyone, relating to the bee question, is anyone documenting the wildlife visiting the garden?
I know that they have informational, how should I say it, Ellie? Well, information about some of the birds, and they have walks and such, but in terms of a very scientific research study, I don't know that, and unless Ellie does.
Well, you're right. There are groups who are monitoring wildlife, and I think that they have a program they're scheduling to monitoring on a daily or seasonal basis, so that they can provide the data. This is in their, in SNFCC's program for next year.
Oh, that's good.
Great. Okay, super. Somebody is asking about, is foam glass gravel? You were talking about foam glass?
Gravel,
there's a
yeah.
query
It's a
about-
buildup. It's a buildup underneath the green roof when you have more depth than you need, let's say, for soil and drainage. So to meet the grades or the changes in levels, etc. So it's like a filler, you might say.
And what's it? Is it foam or is it glass?
No, it's glass.
Eh?
Glass.
It is glass. Okay.
Okay.
Do the species grasses reseed into the landscape? Do you have to control the self-seeding, or do you work with it and let them go?
That's a good question that Ellie probably can answer.
It works really well on the green roof. We don't have issues with the grasses on the rest of the hill. So, and I think that was part of the initial design intent, for the grass to recede in order to have a vibrant green roof. So it works quite well. And
But
I
it
wanted to
doesn't get
mention,
into the
it
right,
doesn't,
get into the Mediterranean garden.
no, we didn't have these issues. And we have in between what we were calling the buffer zone that Debbie showed earlier. So there is this distinctive, let's say, zone where we have also wild olive shrubs and pistachios, etc. And it's sort of screening for the seeds as well. I believe it works like that.
We also cut the grass, once.
Every January, yes.
Yeah, so that may help with the reseeding issue.
Yes, and we have also bulbs on the green roof, and we have collected with the Diomedes garden, actually collected the poppy seeds and the chamomiles. So this time of the year, most probably we will see some poppies popping out.
Okay, great. Somebody's just commenting that they're gardening in a James Basson garden, and they're finding the Hyperverania is very competitive. I don't know if they mean it's outseeding everything else.
Well, whoever asked that question, can they just?
Mirelle Foray.
Yep.
Hi, Mireille.
Hi, how are you?
Very well.
Yes, the Hyperenia hirta. It's very, very competitive. We've been trialing some grasses in some areas of the garden, but the Hyperenia hirta is very much the strongest species. I'm not sure if it might be because of the type of gravel that we have, the size of the gravel, but yeah, that we find that establishing other grasses has been difficult. I have been looking for grasses in the local landscape, which I'll be trialing. But yeah, the Hyperenia is very strong.
Okay, so what would happen if that was just used as a single? Do you ever do that? Do you ever use just a single cultivar? Is that not good planning? I don't know.
Yeah, I think Kevin's been working on that the most, so he can answer what he's going to think about with the grass. But it was last season I was working with him, and the Hyperenia pops up everywhere. controlling it is, yeah.
Kevin's just popped up a little comment to say about the grass and saying it self-seeds like crazy. So
Okay.
that's the answer to
he's
that.
he's another James Basson colleague.
Yeah,
Yes, Kevin. So
yeah.
can you answer, Kevin, the question about, so do you always use multi-species or single species? And then, you know, what's the, or even Debbie, obviously you chose 7.
Yeah. Wanted a variety.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
James picked 3. We had one brachypodium that absolutely took over, so he had to dig it all out and take it away because that was too happy here. But Hyperrhenia is very good, and we do 2 others that I don't remember the name offhand. One is struggling, and the other one is okay. But the Hyperrhenia, we cut it down. You can have it in multiple stages. It regrows very quickly, so you can get a bright green, and so you can have a young one, a middle one, a very old one, and I play with it in the garden so that I always have it multi-stage. But it does self-seed, so I take those up, I give them away, I pot them up. But now that they're everywhere, it's happy here, where the other 2 grasses that James chose aren't as happy. But definitely the brachypodiums we stay away from.
Where are you located?
We're in Antibes, between Antibes and Biot.
There's another comment on these grasses from Emma saying Arturo and Luciano at the field. I think we had them, was it 2 or 3 months ago?
Yeah.
Have a big mix of grasses, including Hyperrhenia, Muhlenbergia, and Brachypodium. So.
Well, it might be, you know, the conditions we don't know what we're
Depends where you are. It's the location, isn't it? Location.
And that brings up a very interesting point, and Ellie will correct me if I get something wrong here. But in the great book by Filippi, he has, you know, encyclopedia at the end of alphabetically of the plants, and in the end of each caption, it'll say, give a number, and that number is how many months this plant can survive without water. So Ellie, I think it was a lavender, but she'll correct me if I'm wrong, took one of them, and she has a house on Andros. And in the book, it said such and such plant can live 3 months without water, let's say. Ellie put it in Andros in the summer and it died within maybe a month. Ellie, can you correct me, or is that correct?
Yes, actually, we didn't plant it we planted in the correct season, but apparently it couldn't survive the really harsh sun and you know, temperatures that are in this island. It also has to do with orientation, and since we're facing, let's say, west, it is really crude. Whereas where Marina Adams had a house in Andros, she planted some really beautiful lavenders and they survived, but it was, I think, the microclimate that actually makes a difference.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the fabulous parts about Philip's book is his testing, but of course he's testing it probably at his own nursery. And that nursery, as I mentioned, is adjacent to a body of water. So it's probably a little more humid than, let's say, where Ellie's house is in Andros.
For sure. Kevin's just mentioned another very good grass, which is Lygeum spartum, which doesn't self-seed too much. Moving on, we had a lot of discussion about fire prevention. I think, was it the last talk, Angela? So there's a question here about how was flammability and fire prevention considered in the planting?
Well,
Or
it
not?
was not really. But it was considered in the nurseries because that was a period in Greece where there were a lot of wildfires, you know. So in addition to not wanting all the plants to be in one place for if they got a disease in the greenhouse, it was also the fire issue. That was just another aspect, but not of the choice of plants. What's interesting is I was just in California, in Southern California, and talking to people that I know, they're architects and landscape people, about what happened, you know, with the recent fire. And what was interesting is that a lot of the trees are fine, and it was really more the shrubs. But in a particular instance of a house I know which burned, there were ficus hedges, and the ficus hedges were absolutely perfect. They didn't burn at all. Now, maybe they had been irrigated, right before the fire or something, but it's odd, they didn't burn at all. And you're not allowed to now, maybe there are people from California on the Zoom. You really can't be planting right up against the house at this point.
Yeah, we had a long discussion about that. I think it was last month. Yeah. There's a couple of questions about the Olivia Filippi books. Somebody asked about the ones that you've mentioned, and one is the Dry Gardening Handbook. And I think the one about ground cover actually is in English, but I can't remember the English title, if anybody else remembers it.
No, it's funny. I went on Amazon this morning to try to see, and it didn't come up.
No, I don't think it is in English. I think you have to stumble through the French.
And I think Ellie actually helped translate it into Greek. Not that book, but the first one.
Congratulations.
Okay.
Okay. So there's one more thing from Mirelle, I think.
About grass alternatives.
Well, some of them, I couldn't find my book this morning, but the Frankenia that I showed you in the image is very beautiful, but it probably wouldn't have worked, in a large scale park. And it actually is not in his first book. So the second book on, lawns, etc., has many other plants. I'm going to try to get a copy even in French. Of it. And then there are other books, but I think this first one is incredible. And I actually have this other book. I don't know if you can see it. It's about by Jackie Truitt. I'm not pronouncing her name probably correctly, but it's all about making, the garden in Sparozza. She was an amazing person who was trained at the Architectural Association. She even studied at London School of Economics and also did a gardening course at Worley Place and taught at Harvard from something like, 59 to almost 10 years. Happy to finish that.
That's okay.
She taught town planning.
She was a pioneer, definitely.
Because it's interesting, or because he doesn't understand things.
Somebody has just flagged up that the other book by Filippi is in English, is called Planted Design for Dry Gardens.
Right.
I think we've sort of come to the end of it, Angela. I think we've covered most of the points. There's lots of comments saying thank you for a great presentation, and also comments from people who visited the park and been incredibly impressed by it, shall we say.
Great, thank you.
So thank you.
So, thank you for your lovely presentation. Thank you, Heli, for all your input. Thank you all for joining. And we'll see you next month as normal. Thank you, Deborah. Fantastic. We'll let you get back to work. It's the middle of the day for Deborah. Okay. Thank you all. Bye-bye. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Next month.
Bye. Thank you.